You're live.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Public Safety Subcommittee today on February 22nd. Today we will be continuing our conversation where we left off on the 19th. As a reminder, members, if you have any questions, please try and use the raise your hand feature so I can see you. Sometimes I don't see that, so just wave with your actual hand, that's fine. And I will try to see you. Everyone mute yourself if you are not muted, thank you. And thank you to everyone who has joined us here today, advocates and other interested parties. If a member has a question specifically for you, then we will direct that question to you. Also, Claire, our committee counsel, is on, and Matt Jackson is on as well, who, if we need answers for clarifying questions too. It's my understanding that the amendment office was bombarded with a lot of amendment requests for this bill. So none of them are ready today. So if we're discussing a topic in which you had an amendment, you can feel free to bring it up and we'll discuss it kind of conceptually. And then when we have the actual amendment, you can feel free to move the amendment if that's what you choose to do. Okay. All righty. Let's get started. So we left off talking about body cams, and Delegate Moon had some amendments. And I know Delegate Shetty, you had some ideas. I don't know if either of you wants to talk about those conceptually. I know Moon, your amendment had some typos.
Yeah, so Madam Chair, I don't know what order you want to take these issues up in. I'm actually going to withdraw my body cam feature amendment.
Okay.
I know Delegate Shetty has one that's probably better better constructed. So I will defer to her on that. The other one was on the issue of preemption of MPIA and body cam policies as we do this. So that one's ready to go if you want to talk about that one.
Okay, so how about Delegate Moon, you talk about your body cam preemption, and then Delegate Shetty, you want to talk about your amendment?
Sure. Why don't I just do this on principle then? I did email this to everyone in advance.
Delegate Moon, do you want it to be brought up on the screen?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It's amendment 393229/1.
Okay, so
Okay. I'll get it in just a moment.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, go ahead, Delegate Moon.
So this is very simple. And again, I'll just explain it in principle, but you can see the text. Elsewhere in this document, we said that what we do on discipline was going to be the be-all end-all, and we were going to basically overrule county agreements on discipline. And so with this amendment, I'm just adding that not only do we mean to do this for discipline, we meant to include a couple other transparency topics, and that's regarding the PIA, Public Information Act, and body cams. And I think this is necessary to do because we're about to set up a statewide requirement for body cams with slightly new rules, and we don't want counties setting up a patchwork in advance of this. And the same is true with the Public Information Act, where it looks like between what JPR and the speaker is proposing, we're about to make substantial alterations to the Public Information Act. And again, it should, we can talk about it, but in my opinion, it wouldn't make sense for us to proceed with this without also clearly saying that what we do is going to be the statewide rule on this. So that's my amendment in a nutshell. I would move that recommendation in principle.
So I have a question. Do you have, Delegate Moon, do you have two different amendments? Because this one deals with the inspection of public records. Do you have a different one that says?
No, I think the body cam part is done at the very end by reference to a code section. Let me verify that.
Can Liz scroll down? Thanks.
See the PIA one. Hold on a second. It's
I don't see that in here. Everyone on the subcommittee was received these via email as well.
So on page 15, I have to just verify that that last clause on page 15 refers to the body cam section. But again, that's I can clean that up if it got drafted wrong. That's why I say maybe we should talk about these in principle, and sort of try and move an amendment on whether people agree that we should be preempting on the body cam and PIA.
So what I would like to do, to just throw it out there, is deal with the PIA piece when we deal with HB 671.
Okay.
So
All right. That makes sense. So
Okay.
why don't we just, so I guess I would just move whether we intend to preempt body cam policy.
Okay, I see Delegate Erican.
I'm still confused exactly what you mean by that. And can we scroll down more? Is this a very long amendment? What's the story with it? Oh, I see. Okay, there's the crux of it. So what do you mean? So you mean that we're going to preempt without telling them how we're preempting?
So right now, arguably where there are holes in state policy, a local department and chief theoretically could bargain against certain things, like, hey, I'm going to agree we don't do body cams in Montgomery County. And then if we come in and say, starting in 2025, you have to have body cams, well, that's going to raise a question. What does that mean? Did the local county just block us from putting body cams in that county because they pre-bargained a contract? I don't think we intend to allow that. Hence, it would be, and so you could say, well, all right, they got the body cams, but they've agreed in Montgomery County they never turn them on, except if a shot is fired or something like that, which is possible. That's a possible policy. And again, we don't intend to allow counties to just make policies like that controvert our decision making. It wouldn't mean that there's no local option on any policies we preempt. It just means you can't contract against it. The county can't bind us against that. The chiefs, I think in that scenario, it would go to the chiefs and officers for a discussion. You just couldn't put it into a contract to block us.
Okay, I understand now where you're going. So you're talking about the little time frame between when this part of the statute gets implemented in 25 and where we're at today. There could be many contracts renegotiated and signed that we then have to wait till the termination of the contract before this piece can even go into effect. So your idea is now we're going to tell them now, just so you know, we're coming.
Exactly.
You can't sign any contracts.
Don't be setting up new policies while we do this.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Can we get an opinion from the chiefs and sheriffs on if that would have any adverse impact on their day-to-day?
Yes, would anyone like to speak to that from the chiefs and sheriffs?
Chairman Atterbury, from the perspective of the chiefs and sheriffs, I don't believe we have a position on this particular, and it would not be adverse. I don't know what would occur if there's already in collective bargaining agreements that we've already negotiated policies that have come into play between now and 2025. I don't know how this would fall in, but other than that, we don't really have a position on this as far as being adverse at all.
Okay, so thank you. Delegate Moon, I would ask that so the amendment would be page 2, and Liz, can you scroll down, please? And it's just, as you said, those last 3 lines. So the C. So I'm gonna ask, so we can move stuff along, that you move that portion of the amendment and it can get redrafted.
Okay, so I guess I would move that we adopt an amendment preempting local bargaining on body cam use and activation.
Second.
Okay, I see Delegate McComas's hand raised and then Delegate Erican. Delegate McComas?
It's just a question. I guess what I'm concerned about, and it's not, I understand if this C is what we're dealing with, I get that, but what I don't get is I'm concerned about a PIA. When is that PI going to go into effect? Is it after all the litigation is done as far as with the criminal charges? In other words, when does the committee or Delegate Moon anticipate that a PIA request should be filled?
So if I could just respond, the chair has requested that we not deal with the PIA portion of this right now. So I guess I'm just not gonna take that aspect up. That's probably a bigger question wrapped up with HB 671, the other
All right.
side of this bill.
So basically, we're only dealing with C on page 15 after line 4.
Just the question of whether we're going to allow counties to continue creating local differences in body cam policy.
Okay.
Delegate Erican?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure I understand what we're going to do here. We're moving the concept, but we will still have the opportunity to vote on the actual language, right?
Yeah, but the language is going to be that Claire has confirmed that is the correct language. So we're removing everything above it related to PIA, and then that's the language.
So just C.
Yes.
That's it. A law enforcement agency may not negate or alter any of the requirements or policies established in accordance with this section through collective bargaining. And we're adding it right underneath of on line 15, page 15, line 4. Okay. All right. I understand. Okay, great. Thanks.
Delegate McComas, do you have another question, or is that from before?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's from before. I apologize.
Okay.
I'm trying to write down what's going on here, and I just can't multitask.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to just do a quick roll call vote on that. Delegate Atterbury, yes. Delegate Anderson,
Yes.
Delegate Erican,
Yes.
All right.
Delegate Bartlett,
Yes.
Delegate Davis,
Yes.
Delegate Griffith,
Yes.
Delegate Lopez,
Yes.
Delegate McComas,
Yes.
Delegate Moon,
Yes.
Delegate Shetty,
Yes.
Delegate Sham.
Yes.
Thank you, and that amendment passes. Delegate Shetty, you want to talk to us conceptually about your proposed amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So colleagues, this amendment builds on the amendment we discussed in our last meeting from Delegate Moon. Essentially, it does two things. One, it corrects, if you'll recall, there was a minor typo that referenced an office activating instead of officer. So it would correct that to officer. And it changes instead of, this is a different amendment.
Yeah, we don't have it yet, Liz.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I was like, oh my goodness, you have it. It's not back yet, but the second we get it, we will forward it, of course. So the second thing it does is you'll recall that Delegate Moon's amendment applied only to newly purchased or procured cameras after a certain date. But conceptually, what my amendment proposes to do is it would require the 60-second buffer period to be activated where cameras have that technological capability currently. So many cameras already being used already have that. It's just a setting or device change that can be activated. And so this would not require new cameras to be purchased or for the law to be implemented upon new cameras purchased, but instead would apply immediately. And again, does not change the proposal from Delegate Moon to only apply to video footage. It does not include audio.
Are there any questions for Delegate Shetty?
Move the amendment.
So we'll move it conceptually because we don't have anything to look at.
That's right.
Delegate Arakan,
Thanks. So your idea is that any organizations that I've already purchased but can't, they're going to be exempted from this. So your language will show an exemption for those.
Well, the language as I proposed to council, and we're still waiting for it, is it says essentially like where the technology is applicable or where it has a capacity or something. So I think if drafted correctly, and certainly once we get the language, we can tweak it if needed, but it's around, it's crafted around the technological capacity of the cameras.
any other questions? Delegate McComas?
Delegate McComas, you're on mute.
I have a conceptual amendment that just I want to kind of get in the thought process, and it's kind of like it's an umbrella amendment, which would be basically that the state shall provide funding for the purchase of the equipment, storage, and hiring of staff, review, process, and audit body camera footage, because all of the different agencies, some are very small, some are larger, some are urban, and they have all the bells and whistles. And I think that obviously, if they have the ability to do that 60 seconds, that's great. I mean, but the point is some of these other agencies may not. So I kind of want everybody to understand that I feel if we're going to do this and do it statewide, the state should pay for this. It shouldn't be the little localities that, I mean, my jurisdiction or my hometown, we have at least a quarter of the residents or senior citizens living on fixed incomes. And, we need an expanded police department building. And I'm like, I told the town, I said, you shouldn't be doing this because if the state raises taxes, you're just going to hurt people. So that's where I think the state should be required to fund any storage, equipment purchase, and staff to be able to review this footage, because as we've heard from MML and MACO, storage is just difficult. Well, not storage, but and then everybody using different systems, and then trying to redact things to keep people's privacy, whether it be witnesses, whether it be, people that are injured or potential defendants. So I'm just really kind of concerned about, what we're doing here. I think we need to decide who's going to pay.
So thank you, Delegate McComas. I will just state, and then I'll call on Delegate Bartlett. So I think everything you mentioned is valid, but I don't think that is for us to decide right now, which is why the legislation pushes the time out for body cameras requirement to 2025 to allow us to have that conversation with appropriations and to allow.
Delegate Atterbury, you're on mute.
Okay, that is the first time I've done that this session. So I get a little pass.
You sure
So
did.
It wasn't your fault. It was my fault. So you've never done
see,
it.
There you go. Liz, come on.
Sorry.
So, okay, well, I said a whole lot. Let me just scroll back. Thanks for telling me that. So I said, I'm going to say before I call on Delegate Bartlett that that everything that Delegate McComas said is valid, but that I do not believe that's for us to decide. That is for us to have a conversation with appropriations, to have that conversation about how to pay and help those smaller jurisdictions. And that is why the legislation says that the body cam requirement would not be until 2025. And Delegate David Moon sat on the work group that dealt with all of those issues. It dealt with storage, redaction. I think some other people that are here to help us with questions were probably on that work group too. And so, they need to do their report. folks need to figure out how much it's gonna cost, and we need to loop appropriations in. So that is not for us to deal with, in my opinion, but does not preclude you from putting forth any amendment that you want this subcommittee to vote on. Delegate Bartlett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so I just want to ask a question to Delegate Shetty. So would this go in where it's 3-511 Section A, where that long list is of all the things that the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission should do? And then in there, it's going to be a new one of those enumerated items. I'm not quite sure where it goes.
Yeah, just one moment, please. I want to pull up the request that I sent.
I was actually looking at section, at page 14 of the bill.
So it would be on page 15 after line 4.
Okay, so it would go behind Delegate Moon's C, the new C?
So Delegate Moon has withdrawn his amendment in favor of this one. So it would be in place of C that Delegate
But
Moon.
I thought we just voted on C.
Right, that goes on page 15.
You're right.
Okay, so we just voted on C, and then this would be like a D.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, I just was trying to see where it fit in there. Okay,
Sorry. Yes, you're right.
okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Delegate Erican?
I'll hold my comments till after we act on this motion.
Okay, are there any other comments? Okay, so we are just gonna take a vote on Delegate Shetty's conceptual amendment, and then when she has it in hand, we will take another vote. We'll take a look at the language and take another vote. Delegate Atterbury, yes. Delegate Anderson,
Yes.
Delegate Erican,
Yes.
Delegate Bartlett,
Yes.
Delegate Davis,
Yes.
Delegate Griffith,
Yes.
Delegate Lopez,
Yes.
Delegate McComas,
Yes.
Delegate Moon,
Yes.
Delegate Shetty,
Yes.
Delegate Sham.
Yes.
Okay, does anyone have anything else they want to discuss related to body cams at this point? Delegate Erican?
Thank you. So I have an amendment being drafted that is not exactly like Sue's, but it does say that should the funds, by the time this is implemented, not be appropriated, that this portion of the legislation would not go into full effect. So we are sure in those 5 years, we take the time to actually discuss this with the approps. And if we fail to, then we can't just all of a sudden 5 years have this piece triggered and then dump a huge burden on top of the smaller departments. That's conceptually what the amendment does.
Okay, you repeat it one more time so I can write this. I'm writing it down.
So it just provides for a stopgap so that if I think it's 2025 when it goes into effect, if by 2025 appropriations has not appropriated the funds necessary to implement the program for the departments that currently don't have it, and for the ones that don't have capacity currently, that it would stop the implementation of just this portion of the law until such a time as it has been appropriated, money has been appropriated for those departments, just so that they don't get a huge bill all of a sudden in 4 years that they can't pay.
Okay, is there any discussion? Delegate Anderson?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Delegate Erican, one of the questions I asked, I think last week, was exactly, and I haven't got an answer to it yet, but how many departments would this actually affect, and what would this huge bill be? Because it seems to me a majority of obviously the larger police departments have already instituted body cams, and some of the smaller departments that would be doing it. I mean, you're talking like this is going to be millions and millions of dollars that would be on these small departments. I was just wondering if you have any estimates as to what the fiscal impact could reasonably be.
Yeah, I did speak to at least one smaller department. They've already gotten an estimate of cost of purchase of about $500,000. That does not include on the back end the state's attorneys for that area and their increasing costs of being able to have staff to redact, especially redact now that we're adding 60 seconds at the end. Plus, we have the previous 2 minutes or minute that we have on the front end. So, so the 500,000 is just for the hardware. So,
How long,
you know,
how large the department was this particular?
I can ask, I can't, which I'm not sure if it was, Sheriff Nesky or who told me what their department's estimate was, but, it's, you know, a small municipality, basically, you know, think Bel Air, something small like that.
Okay, Chief
Yeah.
Morris. Chief
Chief
Morris. Does your agency now have body cameras?
Yes, sir. We've had them in place now for about the last 3 years. We're getting ready to renew our contract.
How many officers or how many cameras does that involve?
All of our patrol units have cameras, so it's about 21 officers that wear the cameras routinely.
And what's the cost to your department on that?
5 years ago, when we first started moving down this road, and like I say, I think we're entering the 4th year of the contract, it was $100,000 for a department my size. I expect a considerable increase when we go back to the table for the next 5 years.
Per year, 100,000 per year?
$100,000 total for the 5 years on the initial implementation.
So that was like $20,000 a year.
For a department my size, yes, sir.
Right, not a huge fiscal impact on you guys.
Well, actually, for a department my size, for a town our size, it is a significant impact. That's why it took a number of years to get that through our council.
And Sheriff Popkin, could you estimate the cost of, I know you have a larger jurisdiction, but what's the cost at yours?
I am at, my contract originally was $1 million, and I'm at about $158,000 a year. It's $1,000 per officer for video storage each year. So I have about 160 deputies, so around $160,000 per year.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Madam Chair, I'm going to vote against this amendment because I've also talked to a couple of jurisdictions with regard to what the cost would be. I don't think it's as huge a fiscal impact as we might conceive at this time. And I think that a 5-year window for an agency that it may cost them, I don't know, $30,000, $40,000 a year. I think, you know, the window is what we built into this bill to ensure that it wouldn't be a big smack at one time, that they would be ready for it if and when, you know, or when that date came. So that's my argument.
Thank you, Delegate Anderson. Delegate Griffith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Morris, you mentioned something that got glazed over just a little bit. You said you expect a significant increase when you renew your contract. Can you speak to what you estimate that's going to be?
We're in preliminary negotiations right now, and the technology has changed since our initial implementation. So not only are we looking at purchasing new cameras so that we can meet the new technological needs. Our old cameras can't be retrofitted to meet the new standards in technology. So there'll be additional purchases for the cost of the equipment as well as the programming, and then the additional storage that may be involved. So again, when cameras were first introduced and have been introduced by a lot of different companies, they all have different technological advantages. Some of them are actually disadvantages. So we have to be careful as we move forward, is to make sure that what we're purchasing is what's going to meet the needs of the department.
So what do you estimate that's going to be?
Preliminarily, I'm expecting the cost to double.
So now take it to what?
The 200,000 preliminarily for a 5-year contract.
So 200,000, so 40 grand a year for a department of your size. Would you estimate, and anybody, the chief sheriffs can speak to this, do you estimate that every department over the next 5 years that has body cameras would have to make a similar upgrade?
Chief Nesky?
Thank you. I can speak to a little bit of that. We just negotiated our next 5-year contract. Our original 5-year contract, I have a department of 67 with about 57, give or take, cameras, because we do have a couple extras in case one breaks. So our initial contract 5 years ago was 425,000. Bargaining and negotiations began at 600 something thousand for the next 5-year period. So we eventually whittled some things around, moved some things around, and got to the 500,000 range for storage only. And then equipment would be covered under warranty. So this is not a wholesale upgrade of equipment. This is primarily just storage capabilities for those 57 cameras.
And one last question. I know we got to move on. I appreciate your patience with me, Madam Chair. Can anybody speak to how many departments, municipalities up that would have to roll this out over the next 5 years to meet the requirement this this bill would ask for across the state between upgrades and new rollout? Does anybody have a sense of that at all?
Hey, Mike, this is exactly the same question I asked last week.
Right.
And I'm hoping to get an answer to that because I want to be as specific as you can rather than talk about there are these, what is the universe? What is the these small departments that are out there that still haven't done body cams? And I can't remember now to whom I asked that question, but they said they were going to get back to the committee.
And Delegate Anderson, so I'm agreeing with you in the sense of what your question is, that, if it's, Chief Morris is $40,000 a year for 21 officers, right? When we extrapolate that out over however many jurisdictions of various sizes, that number could be exponentially higher. And so I think it's incumbent on us that we, commit to, all the stakeholders that we are going to revisit this. So.
Can I respond, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Okay. And all I'm saying, Mike, is that if it's an aggregate total, if you add all these small departments together and what their costs are going to be, then of course it would look almost astronomical. But that's why I was asking Chief Morris and Chief Popkin, what was the cost to their particular jurisdiction to see if, and at the end of 5 years, could a smaller department of 12 to 15 officers be ready to bear this cost, knowing that it's coming in 5 years? And we're operating in the dark if we don't know how many more departments out there don't have body cams. Because I frankly think that probably a majority of the police officers in this state, regardless of whether they're in a big or small agency, have body cameras right now.
And Delegate, I agree with you wholeheartedly, which is why I do like this amendment, because it does hold us to make sure that we do revisit this as we get these questions answered. So it allows us to move this legislation forward, but still commit to doing the work in the back end.
Madam Chair, can I respond?
Delegate McComas, go ahead.
You're muted, Sue.
McComas, we've been doing this since March.
I'm sorry. Digitally challenged. Let Delegate Arcane go first, and then I'll go after her if that's okay. Because
okay.
Okay,
go ahead, Delegate.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I understand where Delegate Anderson and Griffith are getting tied up on the size. How big of a problem is this? But to me, it's not just a problem with purchasing new stuff. I mean, from MSP their initial cost is estimated at $3.278 million, but their annual cost is 1.9. So this amendment's not just about getting funding for the initial stuff. It's also about making sure that we're not leaving a bunch of new funding requirements on people without making sure that we're really it sounds like Delegate Anderson doesn't care about the state funding it at all. And that he's giving them the 5 years so that they can figure out how to fund it themselves. I thought the idea was that we're putting in the 5 years so that we, the legislature, can figure out how to pay for it. So I'm not sure which way we're going, and I would really like a vote to see who on this subcommittee thinks that we're going to end up paying for this stuff, and who thinks we're just dumping it long term on the departments, because those are two different issues.
Delegate McComas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question that I'm going to ask the chiefs and the sheriff here. My question is, how many times have the smaller jurisdictions had an incident where the body camera was needed or played a part in dealing with the accountability or whatever happened? Because I know that, with the bigger jurisdictions, there's just more action, and there's like Montgomery, Prince George's in the city, and maybe Baltimore County. But I'm just wondering if there's any statistics that says, well, Chrisfield doesn't have much action, and if they don't have body cameras, or the little, let's say Oxford has a police officer, one or two. That's a small community. Are they going to need body cameras? I guess what I'm saying is we don't have an unlimited supply of money, the localities, the state. So you want to put your resources where the concern and the problems are. So that's what I kind of want to feel for. Where is the greater need here? It sounds good to say everybody's got to have it, but everybody can't afford it. So that's what I'm kind of curious about.
Delegate, I would answer that question in a way where the chiefs and sheriffs support the concepts of body-worn cameras in all law enforcement agencies in Maryland. It increases accountability, it increases transparency. I've heard the chair loud and clear that appropriations is not part of this committee. However, the cost associated with body-worn cameras is significant. And whether you're a large agency or a small agency, it's all relative. Things happen in every jurisdiction in the state of Maryland, and having a body-worn camera is good for our community. It helps with trust. So anything that happens in my large Montgomery County jurisdiction can happen in a small jurisdiction on the Eastern Shore. It just happens maybe less often. So from the concept purpose, we agree that the 2025 is an appropriate time period to be able to try to work this out. We would just hope that although this committee doesn't look at appropriations, that they always keep this in mind, because the dollar cost, as Delegate Ericon just said, from the state police and from the small agencies is really tremendously high. So if you can just keep that in mind.
Delegate Sham and then Delegate Moon.
I like what Sheriff Popkin just said. I was taking notes. The fact that body cams increase transparency and accountability to the general public. So as legislators, I think it's really, we've got to make the decision, the hard decision. If we're going to mandate body cams, we've got to find the funding for all police departments and agencies to fund the actual body cameras, the storage of the data, how is it going to be housed, and the cost to house and redact and all of that. So, it's got to be paramount for us to, if we're going to mandate it, we've got to find the funding to give these jurisdictions to do so, to fall through.
Delegate Moon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I was on the other work group for the body cams. I was on the Judiciary Committee when we put the body cams in the first time around. And here I am with this third piece of this discussion. This is all I'll say. I don't want to speak for anyone else. My theory of the case as we put these requirements in has not been that we're going to fully fund the departments, just to be very clear and transparent about that. I think what we were talking about was, can we get some money in to get this going. But eventually, I think the understanding was that departments would have to start factoring this in and picking up into time. And what we were talking about was trying to get the seed funding in to get this going. Some departments don't have this yet at all, body cams, and others do. And so that's a different question too, about where this money is going to go. I doubt we're going to be able to appropriate enough to keep every department going in perpetuity. So that's just the reality of this. And we pushed it out 5 years with the hope that that would be enough time to figure it out. And if it doesn't work, then people can always put in bills to repeal, sunset, do whatever. And we've got a full 4-year term in front of us to do that. So with that, I get all the points people are making. I don't think we're going to solve it right now. And so I would just move the previous question.
Thank you, Delegate Moon. So I will do a, excuse me, a roll call on Delegate Erican's conceptual amendment that if the funds aren't appropriated by 2025, then that the body camera requirement is removed.
Madam Chair?
From the bill. Yes.
Only until such a time as funds are appropriated.
Delegate Anderson?
Yeah, I thought I had my hand up. I'm not sure if I did.
No.
Number one, Delegate Moon, you can't make an argument and then move the previous question, okay? You just can't do that. Anyway, but I do agree with Delegate Moon in the sense that I didn't think that we were ever going to be totally responsible for the funding of these body cameras. We as a legislative body, Delegate Chan, make policy. And sometimes the policy does cost local jurisdictions money. Federal government does it to us all the time. You know, they have things that they want us to do, and if we don't do them, then they withhold millions of dollars. You don't make seatbelts a law, okay, then we're taking away $300 million of highway funds from you. You don't make 0.10 the law for drunk driving, then we're going to take another $100 million from you. They create the policy, they don't necessarily fund it, and in the federal government's case, they sometimes defund it. My question is to who is the person here, law enforcement, that best can talk for the Police Training and Standards Commission? Who's here for that today?
Is that Michael Brady?
Delegate, I sit on the Standards Commission.
Okay, so Sheriff, my question, I guess, is what, and it doesn't have to be, I'm not going to hold you to this answer, but what percentage of the large police agencies like Baltimore City, Montgomery County, Prince George's, Howard, Anne Arundel, what percentage of them do now require their patrol officers to have body cameras?
I don't know. I know you brought this up at Friday's hearing, trying to get a scope of how many agencies really need body-worn cameras and how many have them. I don't know the answer to that. We can certainly try to get that in the next few days. But I can tell you several that do not have them, and that would be Harford County Sheriff's Office, Howard County, Anne Arundel County, Maryland State Police. Prince George's County PD is in the process of funding, but they have very few out on the road right now. I think those are the larger agencies right now that do not have them. And when I say large, I mean the countywide large agencies.
Right. Okay. All right.
I'm unsure about Charles County at the moment. And I will say, Delegate Anderson, you did ask me a question on Friday, and I told you I would get an answer for you about the technology of the buffering after you turn off the camera. That I've checked with our Axon, that's the body-worn camera representative. They're the big player in this, and that engineering does not exist at this time. There is the existing ability for the pre-buffering of turning it on, but not post-buffering afterwards. So I just wanted to make sure, you asked me that question, I want to make sure you get that answer.
Okay, and one last question, by the way. Do you think we put the departments in a bad bargaining position when the vendor knows that you have to have body cameras? Or is there enough competition out there that you can resolve that issue by playing one vendor off against another?
Well, I will say you can't really play one vendor after another, because once you have signed a contract with, for example, I can only go by mine, Axon, which I've had for multiple years now. I've got thousands of hours of stored video that I can't just go with another company now and
Right.
change over. So once I am in there with a particular company and all the equipment and software, it would cost me a fortune to try to switch to another.
Well, I was thinking more of the smaller jurisdictions that don't have body cams now, that will have to do the initial negotiation with some vendor. The fact that these vendors know that they have to have body cameras, will they jack up the price, or can these new agencies that don't have body cameras now use competition to keep the price down, you think?
I think the market is such that there is such a competitive process right now to try to get agencies on board. And the initial contract is usually your least expensive contract.
Right.
As you've heard today, the contract tends to accelerate and increase as you go on further into this world.
It's like buying cable.
Okay.
Initially.
We're gonna take a vote on this. I'm gonna let Delegate, her hands up, have the last word since it's her motion.
Move
Delegate
the previous
Erickson.
question.
Sorry, somebody muted me. I was unmuted and then muted. Okay. Anyways, thank you very much. I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate everybody chiming in with the cost related stuff. I would just say we just passed a bill that costs $4 billion. So, if we're serious about a topic, if we're serious in this state about an issue like education, why are we not just as financially serious about police reform and funding? So that's my 2 cents, and I'll be a yes.
Okay, so we'll take a vote on this now. And Delegate Atterbury, I am voting no on this for the reasons that Delegate Anderson and Delegate Moon shared. And I also think that it could be used as a reason if we haven't figured out funding for localities to not get them. So then once we reach 2025, they say, hey, we haven't been able to get these, so we don't have to implement them. So I think if we get to 2025 and it's a problem, which I suspect it will not be, then you can put in a bill to sunset it or move it out. And I also did not expect that the state was going to fully fund that the local jurisdictions were going to have to pay for this as well. Delegate Anderson?
Yeah, thanks, man. Just real quick, I just want to say that 7 or 8 years ago, we passed a bill that said that all confessions to any capital crimes had to be videotaped in an area in the police department specifically assigned for that. But we also put in the caveat that if you couldn't afford it, then we'll work with you. And right now, like 7 years later, I think that fewer than half of the police agencies across the state of Maryland have these specially designated areas where confessions in capital cases are videotaped. So I'm voting no.
Thank you. Delegate Erican?
Yes.
Delegate Bartlett?
No.
Delegate Davis? Deborah
No.
Davis?
No.
Delegate Griffith?
Yes.
Delegate Lopez?
No.
Delegate McComas? She's not there. I will circle back, but Delegate Moon?
No.
Delegate Shetty?
No.
Delegate Sham?
Before I vote, just for the record, I wasn't expecting for the state to fully fund this body cam, anything that supports it. I know local jurisdictions do have some responsibility to take care of their jurisdictions, and so do we as the state also have to support them in that endeavor. So with that, I say yes.
And Delegate McComas, and she is not there. That fails 3-7. Okay, any other further discussion on body cams? If not, we will move on to independent investigations. So that is on page 15 of the bill. And so as drafted, the legislation requires that an incident that results in death or serious bodily injury be investigated not by the local police department, but by an independent investigative agency, which is defined in the bill as an independent unit of state government that employs sworn officers. So before I open it up, if I don't know if anyone, I hadn't received any amendments, and we could discuss this section. We can discuss what policing agency do we think that should be? Do we want to specify that in the bill? Do we think that should be housed in the AG's office? Do we think it should be state troopers? What are folks' thoughts on that? And I see Delegate Moon and I see Delegate Eric. Delegate Moon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually did have a very small amendment for this one. It's Amendment 603-827/1. And look, we can just talk about.
Let's just hold on one second. Liz, did you hear that?
Yes, I'll get it up.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
And so I'll just explain what I was trying to flag here, because I think this whole independent investigation agency, I thought was a little murky to me. And so the way it's phrased on page 3, line 16, it says each county should establish an agency that investigates and reviews police conduct complaints. I just wanted to clarify that this agency, my amendment says that they also receive these complaints. And I guess I just wanted to walk through and make sure I was understanding what we were trying to do here. And see we're all on the same page. So if a resident has a police complaint, they think a traffic stop was racially motivated or something like that, I'm guessing that what we're trying to do is say that this is the agency they could call to lodge that complaint. And if not, I guess I'd be curious to see how we're thinking about that. But that was my theory of the case, that this agency should also be able to receive these complaints originally. Sorry, the amendment number was 603-827/1. And then the other aspect of this amendment is just to be very clear about the terminology we're using here. On page 20, for example, and 21, I think we start using the term law enforcement agency. And I think that term is referring to the independent investigation agency. And I guess I would just request that it's not clear to me that it's a law enforcement agency yet. That seems like a policy decision, and that whatever we decide, we should use consistent terminology. I would prefer we just call it the independent agency throughout. So that's what that amendment was trying to do. Clarify two aspects. One, that this agency receives complaints, and that it is in fact an independent agency and not a law enforcement agency.
So a couple of things, and then I see Delegate Erican and Delegate Anderson. So this part of the bill is meant to reference like the Attorney General who would investigate an incident. I think you're also bringing in what I think, and you can feel free to disagree with me, a separate issue about where are complaints received and air quotes processed. And I think that the speaker is going to be offering an amendment here this week dealing with that. So that's one thing. On page 20, line 23, let me see. Okay, that says, oh, that's supposed to be a police accountability board. It says independent agency, but that's a mistake. This is supposed to be on page 20, Delegate Deborah Davis's idea of each county having the independent police accountability boards. But I think, David, Delegate Moon, that those are two separate issues that you're bringing in. And so I do think we have to figure out where our complaints going to be received. And one idea that we are probably going to discuss is a database where a citizen could look up their complaint. Each complaint gets a number and they look them up. That the agency, the police agency, has to assign someone that the complainant could call to figure out what's going on with that agency. So I think that's two different issues.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at. I was trying to look for a clear direction as to if someone has just a run-of-the-mill complaint, like, hey, this traffic stop seems messed up, where would I lodge it? And I'm trying to follow it through the bill. So so just so I understand this, on page 20, where it says each county shall have an independent agency, this is different than the intake.
Yes, so that is referring to, that was a typo. So that should be police accountability boards, where Delegate Deborah Davis's idea was that each county would have a police accountability citizens board that would take a look at policy, appoint someone to the charging committee, the trial board, and the like. So that is different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what, I will reserve my further discussion on, I'll wait to see the speaker's amendment on this topic, and I'll withdraw this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Erican and then Delegate Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a small amendment for page 16, line 13. After the very first "the," I'd like to insert "factual," just to make sure that that's what
Say
we're
that
talking
again,
about.
page 16.
Page 16, in line 13, after the word "the," that first word there, just introduce the word "factual," just so that we make sure that it's a fact finding that we're going to be, issuing. So it's not just not factual. Clarify that that's supposed to be a fact finding.
Okay, do you want to offer that? Are you having that drafted?
Yeah, it's coming.
Okay.
We can vote on it conceptually, because that's exactly what it's going to say. It's just going to say on page 16, line 13, after the first "the," insert "factual." That's
Okay.
all it is.
Is there
So-
any discussion related to that?
Yeah.
Delegate Anderson?
What other kind of findings would they find?
I don't know. It shouldn't be not superfluous information. It should be a finding of fact in the case, period. I just thought it would help clarify exactly what they are supposed to put in the document.
Well, on the completion of an investigation under this section, the independent investigative agency shall submit a report containing the findings. I mean, I don't mean to be combative. I can't imagine what else they would put in the report except for the findings. I don't know.
People are funny, and we're looking at potentially, is this the agency that has civilians in it? I'm getting my agencies confused at this point.
No, so this
No, this
Go
is
ahead.
the agency that is contemplated to deal with any reports of police misconduct that involves the use of.
Okay, this is the super cops. These are like the super cops above the other cops.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was
Gotcha.
that the investigators would probably be state troopers, and that
I don't know if we've agreed to that yet. I don't know if they want that gig.
I said contemplated, Delegate Erican. Why are you so feisty today?
I don't know. You feisty too. We must eat the same breakfast cereal.
Well, I no, because I drank Ensure this morning, so I know you didn't. You're not old enough yet.
Not yet. Getting there.
But getting back to Delegate Moon's point, I want to make sure that he understands that we're talking about two different agencies. The one in this amendment on page 15 and 16 or 16 is basically that agency that we're creating statewide that would deal with complaints of law enforcement officers using extraordinary force against a citizen and the citizen being injured. right, David?
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry. And while I have a question here also, can this initial bit include a conclusion of law as to whether the officer did or did not violate force?
Okay, Kurt, let me let you finish your thoughts.
No, I'm done. I don't understand David's question anyway, so maybe you can answer it.
Okay, David, go ahead. Delegate Moon.
Yeah, just whether there's typically reports, at the stage that we're talking about here, whether you might see someone come to a conclusion about whether force was or was not warranted.
Well, I think that's exactly what they're doing. They're,
Right.
like Delegate Anderson said, they're giving their findings, which would say, yes, it was justified. No, it was not justified.
And look, this bill requires that a law enforcement agency, whether it's Chief Morris's agency or Sheriff Popman's agency, notify the independent investigative agency of any alleged potential shooting involving a police officer or other incident involving the use of physical force by a police officer causing death or serious injury as soon as a law enforcement agency becomes aware of it. So what this bill says is that all the chiefs, all the sheriffs have to report to this independent state agency, whether it's the state police or whoever we're going to decide it's going to be, immediately when the facts precedent occur.
So let me just clarify something. So as there might be just a little confusion. So this goes to the whole idea of a criminal investigation and not disciplinary. And so when the work group met, there was the whole discussion of police should not be investigating themselves, which the work group agreed on. And then there was should there be an independent prosecution, which we did not agree on. So this is, if there is a shooting that ends up in death, then in Howard County, then the Howard County police are not going to go out and investigate that incident to determine whether or not, it was murder or whatnot. So this is the independent law enforcement agency that would do that.
Well, I agree with you, Madam Chair, in a sense that the chiefs and sheriffs and superintendents would have to report this incident to the agency that we're going to create. But there's nothing in the bill that precludes them from doing their own investigation at this point.
I don't know that I agree with you. If this legislation passes, if there is an officer action that results in death or serious bodily injury, it would be investigated by someone else.
I agree.
Okay.
But we don't have anything in the bill that says that if there's a police shooting in Baltimore City, yes, the Baltimore City commissioner has to report this to this investigative agency, but there's nothing in the bill that says the Baltimore City police still can't, do their own investigation. I mean, I don't see that in the bill yet. And I didn't know if we ever even contemplated that.
I don't think we did.
Okay.
Would you like to contemplate that, or are you just throwing that out there?
I don't know. Let me ask the sheriff or the chiefs. What do they think? If we actually go with this agency where you already have to report this kind of incident to an investigative agency statewide, would you still want to conduct your own investigation? Chief Popkin? I mean, Sheriff Popkin?
Delegate Anderson, I think Mike Brady Lieutenant Mike Brady from the state police is on. He's been kind of looking into this. It may help with your question before kind of I jump in.
Okay.
So in answering the question, I would appreciate, so I don't understand. I don't think they should be, and I understand we're having this discussion now, but I don't think the locals should be allowed to have a simultaneous investigation. I don't know what the point of that would be, because It's the independent investigation that would or would not lead to charges. And so you would not want to dilute that investigation somehow and have witnesses giving different information to different people. Some type of, information gets sent to the independent agency and not to the locals. So I think that would just cause more confusion. But Mr. Brady, if you would like to comment.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. You bring up a very important point of witness.
Mr. Brady activated his camera.
Yes, can we ask you to do that, please?
Did it work?
No.
I apologize. I just turned it on. I apologize. It doesn't seem to be.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead, please.
Wait. Okay, well, you brought up a very important issue of witnesses. And if you're going to have an independent investigatory team, I imagine they're going to be either centralized or possibly decentralized, but either way, they're going to have to do some traveling. So say, for instance, you use my department, the state police. While we do have barracks throughout every county of the state, we do not have trained homicide investigators at all those locations. So we're going to have to be sending somebody who's on call to respond. In the meantime, your witnesses are going to leave. If it takes me an hour to get somebody from Carroll County down to Baltimore County, then is everybody going to wait around? If the weather is inclement, or is evidence going to be washed away by rain or plowed away by snow? Who knows what the case may be. We certainly think an independent investigation is appropriate, but in the interest of capturing all of the evidence, the local police department would be the most expedient to respond. And once they're there, they can certainly turn over whatever investigatory leads they have to an investigative agency, or they can do it and it can get reviewed for thoroughness, completeness, what have you, by an independent investigating agency.
I appreciate that. I think that would completely dilute the intent of the work group. And if I can ask, if you're listening, if DeRay McKennison or Samuel Sinyawe or David Roca or Kaylin, if any of you want to chime in on this. Mr. Roca, I saw you just unmuted yourself. Do you want to chime in?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I completely understand the desire for independent investigations of potential serious criminal misconduct by officers, and the idea that the mistrust that is generated when those investigations are done by this officer's colleagues, and the inherent potential conflicts of interest that arise when the officer's conduct could subject the agency to potential civil liability, and yet that agency is doing the investigation. That being said, I think the representative from the state police makes a good, important, and valid point about the need in these cases for there to be immediate response and for certain investigatory steps to take place immediately and not be delayed. I'm also concerned about the possibility that if this independent investigative agency is itself reaching a legal conclusion about whether the law has been violated as opposed to what happened, that legal conclusion, once having been made by this independent investigative agency, will then preclude anyone else who sees the facts or their application to the law differently from ever being able to successfully prosecute the officer, because the officer will then be pointing to this independent investigative authority's legal conclusion that they were not guilty. So in this case, I think Delegate Erican's suggestion that the independent investigation should be about determining what the facts are, but the decision about whether those facts do or don't constitute a violation of law that should be prosecuted is something that I think probably belongs in the hands of the prosecutorial authority, which I think means that there are also separate difficult questions to be raised about whether the prosecutorial authority should always be the local state's attorney or someone in the AG's office or the office of the independent prosecutor or some other entity. I think there are reasons to think about alternative prosecutorial authorities as well. So those are some opening thoughts on sort of the complexities and concerns that we have about this proposal.
Thank you. Mr. McKennison?
Thank you for calling on me. You know, I think this idea of should the police be able to investigate themselves is something that people have continually talked about. I think that an independent agency would be a step in the right direction. There is no reason why we can't fashion an agency that has people who are trained and able to do this. The police are the first people to tell us that these incidents are rare, that they do not happen as often. And if that is true, then there's no reason why we can't have a body that specializes in, that understands these things. I think that the concerns around the police investigating themselves has been well noted throughout these hearings, throughout the work group. It doesn't make as much sense to me that we would have troopers investigate all of these on the front end. Sorry about that noise. It's the phone. Welcome to Zoom. So I think that there are models across the country that we've seen that are actually helpful in terms of allowing the police, allowing there to be investigations. I think that something that the law could do is make it so that it's not only the police who can investigate, but there can be investigators who are not necessarily police officers who can do this. Remember that when we think about these across the state, the current model of the police investigating themselves hasn't led to much of anything either. So when we think about this notion of 134 people killed by the police since 2013, only in 2 cases have there been charges and none of them have resulted in any prosecutions.
Thank you. And so I think Delegate Anderson, when the work group voted on this language and recommended this language, that was the intent, to have a completely separate, not your local folks initially go out and respond, but you know, perhaps it's the state police because they do have barracks in every jurisdiction, or perhaps it's an investigators from the Attorney General's office that goes out and investigates these incidents. I think that was what the work group had contemplated. I'm certain that the work group did not contemplate local jurisdictions going out and responding to these incidents.
Okay. May I say something, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Okay. I agree with you 100% in what you just said, because I was on the work group as well, and I get it. My point is that I think the question came up in the discussion earlier as to whether or not a local police department would still be able to investigate under the language that we have now. And I don't see anything in this bill, and you can ask Claire if she does, 'cause she's, you know, obviously the person that crafted the bill, Claire Rossmark, committee counsel, excuse me, as to whether or not the language as we have it now, where the statewide investigative agency, whoever it is, whether it's retired homicide officers from across the state, or whether it's retired state police officers, if they start the investigation, I don't think there's anything in the bill that precludes that local jurisdiction from continuing its own investigation. And we may have to put something in if that's what you think is necessary, but I don't think it's there now.
Okay, thank you. I see Delegate Erican, then Delegate McComas, then Delegate Bartlett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I just want to slow it down and think about this from an actual scenario. Okay, so an event takes place, officers are already on the scene. It's a use of force incident and it ends in a homicide or a death. And then the police officers on the scene who are now going to be under investigation are calling who? They're calling their own department, because that's so they're connected to their own people. Now they could pick up their phone and call 911, then it's going to go to the call center, and the call center is still just going to divert the call to the closest place. So how are we anticipating? I mean, if I could just ask Chief Morris, what are we thinking would be the actual physical manner in which the police officers that now are under investigation are going to somehow contact these other people while themselves protecting the scene that they're about to be investigated for? It's not working in my mind. Maybe Chief Morris can elaborate on what would this look like?
Chief Morris.
Okay, and good afternoon. And, I think we have to look at the practical application of this. We're if the idea is that we're looking at this situation in a vacuum, then we're not looking at the reality of a situation in which an officer or officers are involved in lethal use of force. It's still a homicide investigation. It's the most complex investigation. And that's why the homicide investigators, whether it's the Maryland State Police or Prince George's County or Baltimore City, are the best in the business. And the fact that the investigation could involve multiple agencies, multiple officers from multiple agencies, it could even, the crime scene itself could span miles. So when we look at the nature of these types of situations, to suggest that it's as simple as the incident occurred and we're just going to stand by and wait for investigators to respond, we've still got to manage the crime scene. We've got to detain witnesses. We have to preserve evidence. We have to render aid. When these types of situations occur, the reality is that there's a huge response from law enforcement officers from the entire area. And so we just have to look at the practical realities of these types of situations when we're dealing with it. The idea that the agency or the officers on the scene are going to stand by and do nothing and wait for an agency to respond, whether that agency is 20 minutes away or 2 hours away, is just impractical from the reality of these types of situations. And I think it also, we have to remember that there are so many levels of review in these situations. In Prince George's County, the state's attorney is going to have a state's attorney or multiple assistant state's attorneys respond to the scene to assist in walking through the crime. It's still a crime scene until it's determined that the actions the officer or officers involved were justifiable. And those conclusions are not drawn by the investigators, regardless of the agency. Those conclusions are drawn by the state's attorney based upon the facts that are submitted in the investigative report. So it just seems short-sighted to me, and I don't mean to sound condescending. Please don't take it that way to suggest that these occur in a vacuum. These are extremely complex investigations, can span multiple jurisdictions, and involve, on some occasions, potentially 20, 30, 40, or even 100 witnesses, depending upon the nature of the situation.
Thank you. I would like to ask Neil Franklin to respond.
Sure, and I'll be brief with 2 points. First, to address Delegate Anderson's concern about an additional investigation by the local agency. I think what Delegate Anderson, I think we were talking about is, even though we have that statewide agency, whoever they are, conducting an investigation, what prevents the local agency, the one that is involved, where the officers are who have committed the act, of following behind them, for instance, interviewing the same witnesses, trying to gather additional evidence, and you have basically 2 different tracks of 2 separate investigations. I think what you're saying, there's nothing in the current bill that prevents that local agency from doing that, which I think would be problematic in and of itself. So I just wanted to address that. Regarding the mechanics of the investigation, I do have to agree with Chief Morris on this. At the initial onset of the investigation, when right after something occurs, you're going to have police officers there coming from that local agency who are going to be the first ones there. You've got to preserve evidence. You've got to identify and track down witnesses. And you have to get initial statements why things are fresh in the minds of anyone who may have seen anything. You have to look for available, for instance, maybe video from storefronts or gas stations, or there's so many pieces that are important to that initial investigation where things cannot be lost. And you have to get, many times you're assigning patrol officers to help with this because it can be vast in and of itself. That said, you're really looking at two things here. You're looking at that initial response from whoever is available to get and to secure and to, that evidence, witnesses, and so on. Then the second part are those premier investigators, who eventually get there and start meeting with all the folks who were on the scene. Okay, what was your job? What did you get? What did you go after? Even these responding, there has to be coordination from these responding investigators who can maybe give instruction to or make sure that certain things are done. As they're responding, they're on the phone consistently talking to people who are on the scene, or whoever that person who's there. Maybe it's a sergeant, maybe it's a lieutenant from that agency who is handling the basic stuff initially. And that investigator is on the phone with them, making sure that certain things are being done, asking certain questions as they're arriving to the scene. So I can't see anywhere around not having the local agency doing some initial pieces of this investigation as your main investigators are responding. I mean, that's what we have now, even when, for instance, in Baltimore City, when something like this happens, even though you have homicide investigators on the scene, it takes them a while to get from headquarters to the Eastern District or the far reaches of the Northeast District or whatever it may be. And so they're trying to coordinate those on the scene patrol officers and sergeants while they're heading there. And then they take over the investigation once they get there, and they then call additional homicide investigators from their teams out to assist. So you're going to have, it's going to be part one. And I mean, you're going to have that occur, and you're going to have the statewide investigators also doing their part of the main investigation. I don't see any way around it. I do agree that we need the statewide, whatever that entity looks like, to manage the investigation and to make it happen. I agree with that. And that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of coordination. We have to do that. We have to put the time, the energy, and the resources in to make that happen. But again, initially, you're going to have some involvement at some level from the local folks who are on the scene initially after the event occurs.
Thank you. I see Mr. McKennison. Do you want to comment again? Was your hand still up?
Apologies for the ringing earlier. It's just a reminder that Maryland is not the first place to think about this or to deal with these issues. So, we can send some other places that have mapped out the process, but like you said, Mr. Franklin, in places like Connecticut that mandate independent investigation, they outline that officer, and this is on their website, it's a very clear process outlining that police officers at the scene will have to provide immediate first aid, that they will have to make sure people are transported to a medical facility. The on-duty patrol supervisor will ensure that the crime scene and any witnesses are secure. And then it maps out who has to be immediately notified. And then it maps out the way that the investigation materials are turned over to the independent body, and that the officers on the scene have to secure the site. That Maryland is not the first place to deal with this. It's not the only place. I would caution against the fear mongering that the idea of an independent investigation will only lead to chaos. It will only lead to something that the police in the local jurisdiction can manage. Again, what we would say is that the data doesn't even support that, if anything, there should be more attention to these cases. And if there is a group of people that we would want to not be involved, it would be the officers who just were engaged in the deadly force incident. It would be their peers, it would be their supervisors and their friends that frankly don't give us the most hope of an independent investigation. But there are processes. This idea that this cannot happen or has not happened in the country is simply not true. The idea that there is no way to make this work, again, Maryland is not the first state to engage in this question, and there are other states that have a model that works.
Thank you. And I think Delegate Erican, and then I'll call on some other folks, just Mr. Franklin and Mr. McKesson explained it thoroughly. And if you take a look at the bill on page 16, lines 9 and 10, it does actually say that the folks that are right there will cooperate with the independent investigative agency. So they would do those initial things in conjunction with coordinating with the independent investigative agency. So Delegate McComas, then Delegate Bartlett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple conceptual amendments. Before I give you that, though, I wanted to just say that, you know, a number of our sheriffs are elected by the voters. And so we do have to have some kind of respect for the fact that they represent the consensus and the voters of that particular jurisdiction. So, you know, and because of that, I think that they feel that they would be better investigating some of these instances than some super agency, which we really haven't gotten nailed down. So what I would just do is, my first suggestion would be on page 20, lines 23 through 25, where it says each county shall have an independent agency that investigates and reviews complaints of police misconduct filed by members of the public. I would say that that's an unfunded mandate and basically kind of usurping the power of the elected officials because one, you're going to have to train these people. Are they going to kind of interfere with this other super agency? So
Okay, so let me
have a fluid system here of
Delegate McComas, so we still have to deal with Delegate Ericans, and then we can deal with your.
Oh, okay, all right.
But I think you have confused the two. So on page 20, that is a separate board. That independent agency is a typo. That is each county, the legislation requires each county to have a police accountability board. Similar, Howard County has one, Prince George's County has one. I'm not sure what other counties have them. And it's a policy board made up of citizens. So that's not the independent investigative agency. That is a typo.
But it's a big typo though.
Well, it can be, I'm letting you know it's a typo. Okay, so let me circle back. Delegate Erican, are you pressing your amendment with the factual?
Yeah, I think it's a small amendment. Even Mr. Roca thought that it wasn't harmful. It might actually be a helpful amendment. So that's pretty amazing. So if the two sides have come together on that one word, then it's something. It's progress.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty amazing too. So let me.
I have my question.
Yeah, Delegate Bartlett.
Just really quickly, what I don't understand with the amendment is, and I think this is how we got so far over. Is it the job, and I understand this is what Mr. Roca is saying, but is it intended by the work group for the job of the independent agency to do an investigation and not reach any conclusions whatsoever? Was that intended to be the job of the independent agency?
To not reach a conclusion?
Mm-hmm.
They're investigating to reach a conclusion.
Right. So my question is, if there is the conclusion merely to say that this was X, use of force, that this was a unreasonable use of force or whatever we end up with, or is there a conclusion merely to say that on September 16th, 2020, this occurred, that occurred, this occurred? Because if that's the case, then I see why we would only have the word factual, because then all they're doing is determining what factually happened. But I don't understand why the word factual, because they're not merely a fact finder. It sounds like they're more than a fact finder. So that's why I'm a little bit confused about the role. Is it to find facts, or is it to find the facts and to reach a conclusion?
To answer your question, Delegate Bartlett, so on page 16, line 11, the independent investigative agency is to turn a report over to the state's attorney, the local state's attorney, and also to, if we determine who an independent prosecutor at some point would come in. So no, they aren't supposed to say this incident happened on X date at X time. They are supposed to reach some conclusions. Does that answer your question?
It does answer my question, and yes, that's why I won't be voting for the amendment, because we're supposed to do more than, they're supposed to do more than find facts.
Thank you. Delegate Griffith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to comment very briefly on something that Mr. McKesson mentioned. He mentioned that this is, we're asserting this would create chaos. And I don't believe that's our intent on unpacking this a little bit more. I just believe we owe it to Mr. McKesson. We owe it to all the advocates who've put so much work into this, the committee, and of course, law enforcement, to make sure we really unpack this and really understand this as we move this forward. So I don't think anybody's saying this is going to create chaos. I just want to make sure that we really lay this process out very thoroughly for everyone, especially the advocates that have worked so hard on this. So thank you.
Did you want to say something, Mr. McKesson? No, I just saw you pop up.
Yeah, I would just say that, so Delegate, that makes sense to me, Delegate Griffith. I was responding to this idea that that it would be impossible. What I was hearing was this idea that it would be impossible for another agency to do this well, or this notion that the local agency is the best equipped and the only agency equipped to do this at all. I think that to me, I think that those things are not necessarily true. And I think the spirit with which I heard them, not from you, was this idea that any alternative to the local police would necessarily lead to things that didn't work. And I don't think that those things are true.
Thank you.
Delegate Erican, and then we're going to vote on your conceptual amendment about adding the word factual.
Okay, so I'm confused because you when you answered Delegate Bartlett, and you rightly explained that this is getting passed on to another entity. The other entity is the entity that decides what kind of action should take place. So it was my understanding that the investigators, police officers, do not decide the action to take place. Agencies do not decide the action. They send it to the prosecutors and the DAs and the state's attorneys to decide the action. So this agency, from the way I've read it, is not the actionable spot. That's the next one. That's why I had included factual, because that's all that goes forward from this agency to the then charging agency. Is that how, so are we going to give an investigative agency charging powers as well? Why would we ever need to send it over to the state's attorney's agency, this new state's attorney idea, if that whole agency is going to do the whole kit and caboodle? Do you know what I mean?
So I think to answer your question, and to circle back to what Delegate Anderson said, they're making their findings. So if they're not giving them facts in their findings, what else are they going to give them?
Well, they could be giving a recommendation for some kind of charging behavior, which I thought was in the hand of the next step. So I thought this step was finding a fact, and then they passed finding a fact over, and the next step picked up that ball and said, okay, here are the facts of the case, and we're deciding whether or not we should move into a charging mechanism or whether or not we're going to drop this at this point. Is that not what was intended? The one would pass the next step onto the next group? Because that's how I read the bill.
The intent is that the independent investigator would turn it over to whoever is prosecuting the case, and the prosecutors decide based on the investigation whether or not they're going to move forward with any charges.
Right. So then my amendment has nothing to do with what Delegate Bartlett said. It's not changing anything. All it's doing is saying this should be the fact finding needs to move from this desk into the department where they're making the charging decisions.
Okay, I'm going to call. I did skip Delegate Lopez, so I apologize. Did you still want to comment, Delegate Lopez?
I did, but now it feels like I've got 5 more questions. I guess I don't really want to like stir the pot when it feels like we're coming to a consensus. But my feeling is, you know, we're creating this investigative body. What if the state's attorneys doesn't agree with the fact finding?
Well, then that's another bill, but the state's attorney right now, under this legislation, can decide if they want to move forward. There are 2 other bills out there which might get pulled into this work group. One says if the state's attorney decides not to charge, then the attorney general can decide. And the other bill is reversed. It says that the report goes to the AG and they can make a determination. And if they say no, then the state's attorney can move forward.
Gotcha. I'll just wait to bring up my questions when we start talking about those bills too, or how we can introduce them into this.
Okay, I'm calling a roll call on this really quickly because Delegate Shetty has to leave us momentarily here. So Delegate Atterbury, no. Delegate Anderson. Delegate Anderson. I can't see you on all these squares. I'll circle back to you. Oh. Delegate Erican.
Yes.
Delegate Bartlett.
No.
Delegate Davis. Delegate Deborah Davis. No, you're on mute, but I saw your mouth. Delegate Mike Griffith.
Yes.
Delegate Lopez.
No.
Delegate McComas.
Yes.
Delegate Moon.
No.
Delegate Shetty.
No.
Delegate
I'm here,
Sham.
by the way.
Okay. Delegate Sham.
Yes.
Delegate Anderson.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My power went off in my neighborhood. I just switched over to my cell phone and I'm voting no.
Okay, that fails 7-4. Okay, so I think this is a good place to wrap up, to allow folks to get something to eat before we move along to Judiciary Committee. We are meeting on Wednesday at 12, and we are going to move into no-knox and LEOBR and accountability. Okay, everybody? Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and answering our questions and helping us through this process. See Judiciary at 1:30.